All right, welcome to Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg, and we are joined by retired, I don't want to say former, you're retired U.S. Attorney Steve Snyder returns to Halitics. Hey, Steve, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Hal. Good to be here.
Really appreciate your joining me, and it was on short notice. And you mentioned, this is your go-to guy now for Halitics. And the first time you came on, it was kind of special for me. I hadn't seen you before I'd seen you before, I hadn't seen you on my program. So I dressed up. I actually wore a jacket. I can't say I wore a suit. No one knows what I was wearing underneath. Now that you're a regular, you get to see me in all my sweaty hoodie glory.
You look great to me.
Thank you. That's what my wife says. Actually, that's what I say, to her when she starts complaining about how she looks. I'm like, well, you look great to me, but never works. I don't know, for some reason. Wanted to get you back, Steve. More developments in Minneapolis. That was the predicate for your first appearance. And before we get into the details, a lot happening. You had mentioned during our show that there was a lot of energy, a lot of obviously anger among the populace there. We saw it on display over the weekend. So I just want to show just real quick, and we'll get into the details of the shooting, but I really did want to just show a couple of quite a big crowd, shall we say, in the streets of Minneapolis. Fox News describes it as hundreds. I thought that was quite an interesting understatement. Let me see if I can get that. So here we go. Aerial footage, Steve, captures hundreds of protesters, according to Fox News. And we'll just play a little bit of it. I tried to count from this. I think I got more than a few hundred, as the term hundreds would suggest. And I actually did highlight it. There you go, hundreds. Turns out, according to the Minneapolis police, they had over 10,000 people in the streets of Minneapolis, which is not an enormous city. What does that tell you about people's feeling about these people in our city streets?
Well, I think I don't know what the formula is, but it just kind of seems to me from my experience that for every one person that shows up to publicly protest anything, there are probably 5 more people who feel the same way, but for whatever reason don't show up. And I think particularly where you have large numbers of people coming out in the winter, when they are protesting, what they see is an overzealous militarized response to what might or might not be a legitimate problem, but nonetheless, the response was not what the people wanted. If I were an objective leader, regardless of my public stance, I would take note of that. I mentioned last week about the protests last summer, the No Kings and such. I think that any reasonable leader has to say at least, hey, there are a lot of people who are not happy, so we have to deal with it in some way.
Yeah, I see it the same way, and I think it's very unfortunate. This is one of the issues that I have with Trump, obviously, is his divisive tactics. As much as I felt that George W. Bush was a very problematic president at best, he did seem to do more than pay lip service to those who disagreed with him. He seemed to actually acknowledge that there were differences of opinion, and that was legitimate discourse in a democracy. Trump, no. If you don't agree with Trump, you're an enemy of the state. You're someone to be targeted. And we're seeing that right now. Judges or Jerome Powell being investigated because he doesn't want to lower interest rates the way Trump thinks he should. That's my sense of what's going on here. I understand from Justice Department administrative judges that they are on an incredibly short leash. If they rule in opposition to the way Trump and his people want, they risk being fired. This isn't democracy, in my opinion.
Well, I guess ultimately it depends on how you define democracy, but I am generally reluctant to characterize things rather than just describe what is going on and deal with what's happening. I think the problem when you characterize things is then you get into an argument about the characterization rather than the other underlying facts that led to that characterization. And so I think, and I also think with respect to Trump's response, his experience in life, as is most people who are successful, is you do what you got, you do what got you there, and you keep doing it until it either works against you or somebody stops you. And unfortunately, Trump's tactics have generally been very successful for him, if not for the people around him. And you can ask any contractor who ever worked for him, or many of them anyway, and there are many, because I think he had relatively few repeat players. When I was a freshly minted lawyer, we actually represented a contractor in a case against Trump, and this was in 1989 or so, and I saw firsthand the tactics that he used in litigation, and those tactics have not changed, and that's because they have generally been very successful for him. So I think one of Trump's skills, he has many skills, however loathsome an individual he is, he has many skills that you have to recognize and acknowledge, is that he can operate on multiple levels, where he's saying a lot of stuff to try to get people's attention, but then he's actually doing things that merit attention, but because people are distracted by the superficial, outrageous statements and things that he does, that they're not focusing so much on the underlying issues. And so, yeah, Trump's going to demonize people, he threatens people and such. That's just what he does. And I wish he didn't do it, but that's what he does. And so given that, I think you just have to accept that and deal with the substance of his actions as best we can.
Well, that's the problem, right? I mean, we don't have a lot of, as far as I can tell, recourse that's likely to be effective. I mean, you mentioned the No Kings rally. We saw, again, tens of thousands of people just in Minneapolis alone. Obviously, his policies are not going over well for, with a large percentage of the American populace, whether it's 50%, 40%, unclear. What do we do then? What do you recommend, if anything, that would be effective? I understand so when you say something isn't democratic, then or isn't democracy, we get into an argument about democracy. I think it's relevant, though. I'm going to push back a little bit, because I think that even Trump supporters would be loath on what they often say, what I'm hearing on the right. Well, we don't live in a democracy, we live in a republic. Well, republic, democracy, call it what you like. I think most people believe there should be rule of law and that even presidents aren't above the law. Trump's actions suggest reflect his contempt for laws that he doesn't like and his unwillingness to follow them. And that's what I think is the value of saying, hey, we're not where we should be. We're not where we want to be as a country. How do we change course? How do we change direction?
I guess the question is, whose direction are you trying to change? I think that
let me just answer that for you in the direction you'd like us to change.
Well, I think that as long as we still have elections, if Trump or someone somehow suspends elections this year, we don't have elections, all right, that's a new problem. And that's obviously a really serious problem, but we're not there yet. And it's noteworthy that in every election where Trump has not actually been on the ballot, since he ran in 2016, so 2017, 18, 19, 20, everyone where he has not actually been on the ballot, Democrats always overperform. They don't necessarily perform the way that those who support them want to all the way, but they do better than expected. And the elections last year are a great example of that. And so I think I discussed it when we were on last week, that in the end, there is no substitute for doing things the old-fashioned way, which is you build support at a local level and you go up. The Republicans figured that out 30, 40 years ago, and they've been remarkably successful at doing that. but there's nothing inherently better about what the Republicans do than what Democrats do. And Democrats are starting to do this. So you concentrate on the state and local level and things percolate up. So even if Trump doesn't care about the No Kings rally, or he explains it away, or he just says they're all a bunch of losers or worse, and if he and his lackeys, his lick spittles at Fox News, count the number of protesters in Minneapolis and other cities around the country is in the hundreds or the dozens, whatever they choose to do it, you can bet that local politicians do notice it, particularly in swing districts. There are a lot of safe districts. There are a lot of swing districts. And one of the enduring greatnesses of our country is that safe districts sometimes become swingy very quickly. And there is just no substitute for people doing exactly what people are doing in Minneapolis and cities around the country, getting out there and protesting and letting the politicians know that I'm not going to say this isn't acceptable, because it's so far beyond unacceptable that that word just doesn't describe it. But you let the politicians know that, to use Peter Finch's phrase from the movie Network, we are mad as hell and we're not going to take it any longer. And you're going to pay, politicians. You are going to pay. And a good example of how that worked was with the whole shutdown battle in at the end of last year, where the Democrats were holding out for health care, and a lot of people said that, oh, the Democrats caved and they signed it, and they got this fig leaf vote, like BFD, they got the vote, whatever. Hey, lo and behold, the House, not the Senate, the House passes an extension to the Affordable Care Act subsidies, which I have to confess, I was surprised at.
Is that effective? Steve, sorry to interrupt you, but I was curious, because it still, doesn't it need to be approved by the Senate as well?
Of course, and it needs to be signed by the president. And whether that will happen or not, I don't know. It would seem unlikely. But I would have expected the Senate to pass it rather than the House. But the House, full of all the ideologues and such, but these men and women went back to their districts and in the privacy of their districts, to the extent there is, but they're in the when they're in their districts, they heard from their voters, and healthcare has always been a motivating factor. And so the reason I give that long explanation is that there is daily and repeated evidence that making a big deal, basically making a stink, pays off. So
yes,
how do we change things? That's what we do. We make a stink. Can't get rid of Trump. We're stuck with him with all the problems that he brings. But we can bring in other people who will, I'm not going to say fix things, but can move us in a direction that is more comfortable to people on the left, certainly, and I think to many people on the right as well.
Steve Snyder with us, retired U.S. attorney. Don't forget, please click like, click subscribe. Please comment in some fashion. Make your wishes, your feelings known about what we do here. Really appreciate that. 240-242-5646 if you want to join us. Would love to talk to you. Steve, when we spoke last week, you indicated that prosecutor, you didn't, as far as I can recall, I don't think you came down one way or another in terms of whether you believed charges should be brought against this officer. I think we agree the officer who shot Renee Nicole Good, I understand his name has been put out there. I haven't even looked at that. I don't really care, but whatever his name is, you indicated that it would be a difficult case to prove, to win before a jury, I presume. Now, he might even waive his jury, depending on where the case would be tried. The officer could certainly waive his right to a jury trial if there was ever a trial. I'm wondering if new information that's come out, including body cam footage, I've got some Justice Department guidelines, which you actually shared with me, brought to my attention. Has that new information changed your opinion on whether it would be how difficult it would be to prosecute the ICE agent, and whether there's any chance that it will happen?
Well, I think that I guess my basic view that the term I would use is obtaining a conviction versus prosecuting. I still think it would be challenging. People generally are sympathetic to the challenges that law enforcement officers face, and a trial would not be next week. A trial would be 1, 2, 3 years down the road, and it's possible that the passions of today will have cooled to hazy memories tomorrow. And of course, that's another skill Trump has, which is, this week's episode of the Trump Show will have some new outrage that'll take our minds off of what happened last week. But all that being said, whether or not this will be brought, I don't know. I before last January 20th, when I had basically rock solid faith in DOJ's investigative procedure, I would have said the case would have been strongly investigated, and there very well might have been a trial coming out of it. Now the cynical part of me is less confident that they will, but you still have to go to line people, and they investigate it. But to your point about new information, I think that the officer's cell phone camera video, even though in and of itself doesn't share a whole lot directly, but it actually does share a lot. One, the fact that you have this law enforcement officer in a situation that was highly charged enough that he felt the need to draw his weapon, nonetheless was recording the weapon with a cell phone camera. Why he's doing it, I don't know. I mean, federal law enforcement officers should have what almost all local law enforcement officers have, which is body-worn cameras, so the officer doesn't have to think about recording it on his phone. Was he doing it to try to intimidate people? Was he doing it because he was sick of seeing other people's cell videos, and he thought, hey, well, I'm going to record mine so people see what I see? Was he just curious? I don't know. But
did he have a deal with Fox that he would share it and get some kind of kickback or something?
Did he have a deal with Fox? I have no idea. But the fact that he was shooting a video while in that situation, I would find concerning. I do find concerning. I want a law enforcement officer focused like a laser on what he or she is doing, not worried about whether or not they're getting the proper angle or whether their thumb accidentally hit the stop button and the camera's no longer recording or whatever.
Well, I just want to jump in again. Also, his hand, right? At least one hand is now not available to use for protecting himself or, getting out, helping himself get out of the way. I mean, you're awkward. You're less able. You're less agile with your hand on your phone.
Of course. And, the fact that he, then pulls a gun out and shoots Renee good. I mean, it kind of reminded me of that scene from the first Indiana Jones movie where the Indiana Jones character is about to get in a fight with that sword-wielding Arab, and he just pulls out his gun and casually shoots the guy. Yeah. But what actually I thought was very telling, and I hadn't focused on this before, was I think this was not in his cell video, but rather the video recorded by a bystander, where after he shoots the woman, after he shoots good, the car has careened into another car and crashed. You see steam coming up from the busted radiator, and he walks away, and you hear him saying effing, but he said the word bitch. So that's his response after shooting a woman. Not, oh my gosh, what did I do? Oh, she made me do it. Oh, I was scared. Oh gosh, this is terrible. But just effing bitch. She had it coming. That's the clear implication.
Or rushing over to see, which he is required under justice, assuming the Justice Department covers these people, and I think it must. He had an obligation to take whatever steps he could to see if she was still living and then preserve her life if he could. And obviously he did not do that, and the agents on the scene did the opposite. I just want to play this clip. This is from CNN real quick, Steve. I don't have the actual raw footage, but they used it in this, and it's interesting. I may stop it at various points for your comment. All right, so I want to stop it there. So she says, that's fine, dude. And you see her face. The reason I raise it, and some people said, well, maybe Glenn Greenwald, who I actually like, who does videos, you might not like him as much, said she's being a little mocking. It's true. It's a little light, right? But where's the menace? It just isn't there, Steve.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this looks like, from what I've seen from when I used to work in our intake section with body-worn camera videos, this looks like a very typical encounter with a citizen who is where she shouldn't be. Maybe she's got a point to make, but she's not being aggressive. She still has her safety belt on. She's not getting out of the car. She has one hand on the wheel, one hand on the open door frame. She doesn't have a weapon. And, she's just another person out there not happy about what's going on. And maybe she stepped over the line by bringing her car where it wasn't supposed to be. But in the range of things that people can do, it doesn't strike me as particularly threatening or outrageous.
All right, let me play just a little more of this. Let's keep going.
That's fine, dude. I'm not mad at you. Show your face. I'm not mad at you. That's okay. We don't change our plates every morning, just so you know. It'll be the same plate when you come talk to us later. That's fine. U.S. citizen, former fucking veteran. You want to come at us? You want to come at us? I say go get yourself some lunch, big boy. Go ahead.
So she is being provocative. That's the spouse. There's no question she's being provocative. And this is when I made the point, or relates to the point I made last week when I showed video of the crowd taunting the officers. And I said I didn't like that. I thought it was counterproductive. And then one of the officers takes the bait and starts throwing F-bombs around. I do expect law enforcement, these guys are paid actually pretty well. They have a lot of power to behave, to take the high road. I would put it that way.
Well, yeah, it'd be nice. I have more sympathy to officers who are not always quite as polite, as long as they are not threatening to people or violating people's rights. I think they have a very difficult job, and whether they're paid well or not, they have one of the few jobs where when they leave the house in the morning, they don't know if they're going to come home alive at night, even though the number of law enforcement officers who are hurt and killed on the job is thankfully very, very small. There's always that risk that virtually none of us face in our lives. So I'm sympathetic to that, but that sympathy only goes so far.
Yeah, I'm sympathetic too, actually. I don't want it to sound like I'm not. I'm just saying I do expect professionalism.
Yeah, of course. And most of them are. I mean, I don't know what was up with this guy. And that's why I think you need a lot of investigation to figure it out. I mean, when I investigated homicides, there would be, the homicide might only last a second. And we could spend months, if not years, trying to recreate what led up to that second. It's very difficult. And memories fade, and people have different perspectives, and people remember what they want to remember or don't. So it's a challenge. But, to your point, yes, of course, police officers always should be respectful and professional. And even if the public is not, they should take the high road and basically do the best they can. And it sounds like, up to this point, this officer wasn't saying anything. I don't hear him responding. So it sounds like he is, basically saying, letting it roll off his back, which is what we want.
Although using the cell phone the way he was to take pictures in and of itself seems problematic to me. That's why it would be better, as you mentioned, if he had the body cam and it wasn't like he's standing there with the hand like this taking pictures. But
sure.
Agreed.
Absolutely.
Agreed with
I thought
that.
It was a great shot when Good's partner is shooting the officer with a cell phone and he's shooting her with his cell phone.
Yeah.
In another world, it would have been like in a movie. They could make something out of it, either dramatic or funny. But of course, here it ended up with deadly consequences.
Are you watching Halitics with Hal and Steve? And we got a little more on this topic. We're going to get to the Donroe Doctrine and maybe Mayor Mamdani, but with retired prosecutor Steve, I really like to get into the details here because he is so knowledgeable in ways that most of us aren't of how these prosecutions go forward. I want to play a little more, and I have a question about getting too deep in the weeds, spending too much time looking at every frame of these videos and talk and every piece of testimony. So he uses "get out of the effing car." Oh! All right. So there you hear that thud. I don't know what that noise was. That was an interesting noise he heard. Is it the snow? You heard the whoa. Let's see if we can. Maybe that was the shots. Those were the shots being fired, Steve. Here's the question. Well, you had said when you heard him say whoa, you're like, well, he was in that moment, he may have really had fear for his life. Your thoughts on that? Does that sort of mitigate or militate in his favor?
Sure. Of course it militates in his favor. Whether the fear is reasonable or not is a question. But I think that it's not an uncommon experience, or I'll make it positive. It's a common experience that we have where we're in traffic or in a crosswalk or something, and a car does something that surprises us. And our first thought is, I could have been hit. And even if the car isn't that close, the car is so big and, human beings are so small that that's your first thought. So I will take the officer at his word that he was concerned for his safety in that moment. But you mentioned a DOJ guideline that I had forwarded to you over the weekend. And I don't know it's applicable to this officer because I think this was an ICE officer, but I'm not really sure. And I don't know the ins and outs of the regulatory requirements. But it's at least it's worth noting for the audience that this DOJ guideline summarized says that police officers are not allowed to shoot at vehicles to stop them from getting away, and they're not allowed to shoot into vehicles unless the vehicle is unless the officer is afraid of deadly or dangerous force, and use of the vehicle does not constitute deadly or dangerous force that would justify firing into that vehicle. And so when I saw that, at that point, it answered another question I had, which we discussed last week, which was, why was the officer in front of the vehicle in the first place? You tell a 5-year-old, you don't get in front of a vehicle if there's any possibility that it's going to be moving. And so I'm thinking, I don't know. My first thought is that it was a screw up by the officer. He thought the vehicle was stopped when it in fact wasn't stopped, and that's why he walked around in front of the vehicle. That's speculation on my part. But either way, because there is no evidence or argument that Good possessed a firearm, the only way the officer was in danger was if the vehicle hit her. And using the gun to stop that vehicle when the vehicle itself is the weapon, particularly when he could have stepped out of the way. I've never denied that. He certainly could have stepped or jumped out of the way. Really, I think, hurts the case for him. Now, whether generally governmental regulations and guidelines do not create private rights of action or criminal liability. So, put in plain English, the fact that there's a government regulation doesn't mean he's criminally liable, but it certainly could expose him to administrative penalties, loss of his job or reduction in rank or whatever. And the regulation might be used in terms of what constitutes reasonable behavior for a police officer.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think it could come into evidence in a criminal trial, going to the question of reasonableness. My understanding is this was not an inexperienced officer. We had talked about his training. I understand he was a 10-year veteran of ICE, so he certainly should have had the training. He was ICE, so that is part of the federal government, the Department of Justice. I think it does go to the question of reasonableness of his behavior, in that moment. I'm sorry.
Let me correct you on something. I don't believe that ICE is part of the Department of Justice. I believe ICE is part of Homeland Security, which is a separate cabinet agency.
So they might have different rules and regulations. That's interesting.
They might. I don't know. I don't know how it applies. So that's why this is just it's just a really complicated analysis, and it is tempting to rush to judgment. But I think that you really need a full investigation. And I just hope that the FBI and DOJ and Homeland Security will investigate this further. The concern I have, which kind of bleeds into your, you teased a discussion of the Donroe Doctrine, is this is another example of this administration's attempt to project force and basically saying, don't mess with us. So rather than viewing this as an unfortunate outcome, the administration very well, and I think some of the comments over the weekend suggested that they view this as a good thing. And that it shows that their law enforcement officers will not take any resistance from anybody. And if you do resist, you could pay with your life.
Right. And it's your fault. You FAFO, F around, find out. Just for folks' information, my understanding here is that the ICE regulations are the same as Department of Justice. They adopted the same regulations. Now they may, or Department of Homeland Security has adopted the Justice Department. At least that's what AI is telling me now. We don't know. AI gets things wrong, but let's see here. They say this is. I'm going to put this on screen, Steve, real quick, because I think it's worth at least sharing because it's important stuff. And I also want to go to this because I know a lot of folks, as you said, MAGA folks, people who support Trump, and I find it very, very unfortunate, are defending this because this isn't what even Trump campaigned on, right? I mean, he's like a lot of it was less aggressive, less aggression, less government oversight.
Well, I don't agree
in people's
with that,
lives.
actually. Trump campaigned on a principle of he campaigned on a principle of force. And when protesters would show up at his campaign rallies, he would criticize them, denigrate them, and suggest that they should be beat up or worse. And so he criticized American cities, and not surprisingly, the cities that bore the brunt of his criticism were cities that are generally viewed as democratic. Haven't heard him criticizing Dallas or Orlando or Miami or Little Rock. And I don't know what those cities are like. Maybe, they are paradise on earth, or maybe they're like every other medium to large city, which has its good parts and has its bad parts. So I don't think that this is a character for Trump at all.
I stand corrected, and I think the most important part of what you just said is if you're going after Trump, if you're challenging policies that he likes or his supporting cities, then he's gonna go after you. If you're projecting illegal force as the January 6th rioters were, then you're going to get pardoned.
Yep.
But I don't know if you can read that. It's a little small, but I'll make it full screen. But basically, they're saying the Department of Homeland Security aims to meet or exceed the standards that the Department of Justice has set for use of force.
That wouldn't surprise me. But so there you go. So that DOJ reg apparently applies to Homeland Security and ICE officers as well. So that officer, again, assuming we do have a fair investigation, is going to have to explain why he fired his gun into a vehicle where there's no evidence that the driver possessed a firearm herself. And his only plausible claim is that he thought the car was going to hit him, and why he didn't just take 2 steps to the right and get out of the way.
Which was also made more problematic because he had a camera. He was holding his phone like a camera in his hand. All right, 240-242-5646 if you want to join us. We'd love to talk to you. And finally, just to get to the idea of any prosecutions, we didn't really get into it, but it seems like there's really little or no likelihood, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the city of Minneapolis or the state of Minnesota could bring criminal charges against the officer. You don't expect, do you, that justice will prosecute him? But correct me if I'm wrong on any of this. And final point, and then we'll get your whole exegesis. What about civil lawsuit? There are a number of places we saw violations that could give rise to civil liability.
Well, in terms of the feds prosecuting him in the city, I don't know. I mean, the cynical answer is no. The feds are going to look at this and say he acted entirely appropriately, and that'll be that. I don't believe the city is prohibited from prosecuting him. He can remove the case to federal court. Again, and when I say remove, he literally files a piece of paper with the court that says, to the local court, that says, you guys can't handle this anymore. This is going to federal court. I don't know the details of that in the connection with the prosecution. The city is hampered because the federal government has not permitted the city and the state to participate in the investigation with it. As a prosecutor, if I did want to prosecute him, I'd look at that video and I'd talk to witnesses. And I'd say, you know what, on those videos, I could make a colorable case. Whether it win or not, I don't know. I could make a colorable case. So I don't want to predict what's going to happen with respect to any criminal prosecution. I mean, and it's also possible that all fair-minded investigators will look at this and say there's not probable cause to believe that he committed a crime, although it seems unlikely. And with respect to civil suit, I'm sure there will be civil suits that come out of this. And again, it will be complicated, and it will be a suit against the federal government, but there are multiple ways that the suit can be framed that are, I'm a broken record on this. They're complicated.
There's lots of interesting ways it would happen. I mean, certainly they'll sue the officer himself for acting under colors of law and violating her right to live without due process. The government usually can avoid that by claiming the officer was acting outside the scope of duties. But in this case, they won't. I mean, it would be very odd to me. This government seems to be insisting that he was acting within the scope of his employment. So that could subject the feds, I guess, to some form of liability. I would just note with regard to the criminal, I would be confident that if there was any real likelihood, if there was perceived likelihood this officer could be prosecuted, I think Trump would probably issue a blanket pardon.
He very well might. Yeah, if it looks like it's going there, he very well might.
In terms of,
I'm sorry for interrupting, but he can't pardon him under state law. And so that's another complicating factor. If Trump pardons him federally, that only applies to a federal prosecution. So I don't know what would happen if they tried to prosecute him locally under local law, under state law, and he tries to remove the case to federal court, but there's no case in federal court. Does that get rid of the state case? I have absolutely no idea.
Yeah, the federalism theory, I think, would be that if he was acting legally under federal law, then he can't violate state law, that any conflict, in other words, a state law that makes conduct that is legal under federal statute or federal case law could not possibly give rise to criminal conviction. But there hasn't been a determination, right, that he was acting legally under federal law. So you're right. It is very complicated.
And if he's
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, if he's pardoned, and so there's no determination of legal action. It's just that he's pardoned. So that's why I say there's a lot going on here. But it's important to remember the bigger picture, where it is a tragedy for Renee Good and her family, and it's also a tragedy for the officer. I'm sure he didn't wake up that morning. Well, I would hope he didn't wake up that morning hoping he was going to shoot someone. And in the moments, even the moments before the shooting, I don't think he thought so. It's a tragedy for everybody. But the bigger question is, or the bigger issue is that federal law enforcement is swarming many of our cities and having these incredibly fraught encounters with citizens who do not want them there. And we've moved beyond encounters in the immigrant community to encounters in non-immigrant communities. And it is not surprising that there was the shooting in Minneapolis. It's not surprising that there were shootings in Oregon. And there will be more shootings, I predict, because these situations are just so tense. And so we can't lose sight of that bigger question of this mass deployment of militarized and semi-militarized law enforcement forces in American cities.
Yeah, it's really bad. And that's, again, goes to my issue of democracy or lack thereof in our country. Just one more outrageous aspect of this: the denial, the refusal to allow a doctor to provide whatever assistance might be rendered. I don't think in this case it would have mattered. You could see the blood's, her head was basically blown off, so she was dead. But it's still ugly. It's still just one more way that ICE, I think, flouted human decency in this encounter. And
I agree.
As far as I know, there's been no pushback, no apologies, no regrets from this administration. Let's switch gears if we can, Steve, because we got a lot more to get to, and I actually sometimes prefer with you to have sort of more philosophical, big picture conversations. I do think in this case the big picture is really important. I understand we look at the details. The big picture is a woman who, as far as we know, had no criminal record, was not acting illegally, except she did drive off, yes, and was killed. And I think that we have to look at how it happened, but I don't want us to lose sight of that. And you haven't. So I really appreciate it. I really appreciate that. I want to ask you about, though, people who maybe have a very different view, who think, no, if somebody has a badge and a gun, you do what they tell you. You don't ever even consider saying no. If you don't, you're getting what you deserve. Are those people, in the words of California gubernatorial candidate Butch Ware, Green Party, who I would vote for if I lived in California, to be real clear, are those people zombies, the Walking Dead, soulless Yahtzees? And if they're not human, inanimate bots or foreign trolls, because that seems to be his take, and I guess some on the left are arguing that.
Well, I agree with that view. So, and I would not describe myself as a soulless Yahtzee.
No, you don't. You aren't defending the action of. I think what he's claiming that people who say what the officer did was totally justified.
Well, as I've told you before, I'm a raging moderate. So my view is, I'm not going to say what the officer did was justified or not justified. I think you need to investigate, which is generally not a stance that gets a lot of clicks and views in our modern world. I think as a general matter, actually not as a general matter, all the time, a cop tells you to do something, you just do it. And it's, they got a gun, they have authority, you're never going to get away. So I think that that's not only the prudent view, it's not only the legal view, but it's the prudent view. And even if the police officer is acting outside of his or her scope, or they're asking you to do something they're not allowed to ask you to do, as long as they're not doing so in such a way that their request places you in danger, then you do what they tell you to do, and then you deal with it afterwards. And it doesn't mean that in a situation like this, where Good was not compliant with what the officers were telling her to do, they were entitled to shoot her. It doesn't mean she deserved it. It doesn't mean that police officers have a license to deploy excessive force anytime someone doesn't do what they told them to do. What it does mean is just do what they're telling you to do and deal with it later. If they tell you to stop your car, stop your car. If they tell you to leave an area, leave an area. If they tell you to put your hands up, put your hands up. And I think it's not because I'm a right-wing cop lover, even though I generally am very supportive of law enforcement. To me, it's just common sense. They have the legal authority and they have a gun. So why are you going to fight them?
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think my point is that the deplatforming, the goal here of candidate Ware, whom again I would support if I lived in California. I would vote for him for governor because I would think he would be the best option of not very good options. But I'm saying his claim that people who don't share his view can't be reasoned with, must be defeated, I think is extreme, beyond everything else, extremely counterproductive. I mean, you got to have conversation, have dialogue. I don't, people who are, have a vested interest, a financial stake in a particular outcome, maybe you can't reason with them. I think average American citizens, probably even those who in general defend the police like yourself, and believe that officers should be given wide range of discretion, would be troubled by this. And to just say you can't reason with somebody who comes out with a contrary view, that is not, in my opinion, and I would assume you probably agree, is not going to move us forward. It's just going to entrench us more, solidify us even greater in warring camps. And
I completely agree with you. And people like Butch Ware and those who support him are doing exactly like what the people on the right are doing, who take the same approach. And if you subscribe to the Stephen Miller view of the world, that basically might makes right and power wins and everyone else loses and everyone else eats the scraps or whatever, if you subscribe to that view, and it sounds like Butch Ware does, but he wants to end up on top, why I would have no reason to believe that if he somehow were able to obtain any kind of political power, he would treat those even on his side of the aisle with whom he disagrees any differently than he treats those on the other side of the aisle. That's the problem. One of the best tests of a person's character is to look at someone, how they treat people they don't have to be nice to. And if they're not nice to them, well, then as soon as they decide they don't have to be nice to you, they won't be nice to you. Whereas if they are nice, that tells you something. So, yeah, I completely agree with you, Hal. I think it's just counterproductive on many levels.
And let me just one more point on that. Even if you won't ever persuade someone that the officer in this case, or in general, if there are many people who are going to take the side of law enforcement almost always, not always, but the great majority of the time. That doesn't mean you can't reason with them or win with them on other issues, right? Like, you may not agree with me about the officer, but maybe you do agree with me on healthcare. Maybe you do agree with me on military adventurism. So let's talk on let's acknowledge our disagreement here, but see, maybe we can come to some agreement on maybe on wages, on trade, and I can win an election with your support, because on other issues that we deem of great importance, we are close.
Well, you're absolutely right, Hal. And an additional factor is that people are having a discussion. They care enough to have the discussion. They don't stop thinking about it once the discussion ends. And people's views change, even seemingly hardened views change. And people think, and they evolve, and they get more information, or they just sit on it, or their spouse or kid or parent or something says something to them. And to essentially write someone off because today they take a view contrary to yours is not only counterproductive, but it will ultimately hurt you, because people will be looking for an opportunity to knock you down.
Right. I mean, a lot of it becomes personal. They're like, well, that guy treated me badly on this issue, didn't show any respect for me, didn't listen to me. So I'm not going to listen to them. Just as you're saying, we're not going to listen to you because you don't agree with us on the police. They're not going to listen to you. And that's, again, not going to move us forward. 240-242-5646. Steve, Donroe, if we can, Donroe Doctrine, just a little bit. We've only got about 10, 11 minutes left, but I do want your take on it. So let me put that up on screen. This is basically did you remember? Because if someone had asked me 5 minutes ago, what is the Donroe Doctrine? I would have struggled a little. I think I would have been able to kind of articulate it, but how conversant are you on the James Monroe Doctrine?
Well, notwithstanding that, I was just reading about it last week. I'm no more conversant than
Late
anybody else.
reading, is that it?
Yes,
Yeah.
like bedtime reading. No, like everyone else or anyone who knows about it, I know generally James Monroe basically said in modern words, Western Hemisphere is ours, everybody else stay out.
Yeah, man, is he the manifest destiny guy, right? It's our manifest destiny to control the from sea to sea, I believe.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Or that was Thomas Jefferson. I don't know. Who knows? But in any event, that was, Monroe's point was that we're going to control the Western Hemisphere, and we generally have. And so now, Trump is updating that doctrine to say, well, not only are we going to control the Western Hemisphere, but if we don't like a particular government or governmental leader, we're going to change it. So it is a modern update, which for a man who rode into office by saying America first, and we're not going to get involved in foreign wars, and we're going to be isolationists, is a somewhat surprising approach to take.
Yeah, it does seem to contradict a lot of what he ran on and actually won on. I mean, a lot of Americans appreciated his apparent, reluctance to involve us too greatly in other countries' affairs. And now we have this from our from our Department of State, Marco Rubio, out there. This is really an amazing tweet. I just have wanted your comment as a retired government, federal agent, employee, whatever, U.S. attorney, assistant U.S. attorney. Am I wrong? There's something very troubling about the politicization of the Department of State's Twitter feed. Do you not think, Steve?
Again, I think it's a shiny object that's distracting us from the bigger issues, which is what is Trump doing with foreign policy. I think that various governmental arms have always been politicized to some degree because with the Department of State, there's, with international relations, you have international law, but in terms of our approach to the world, it's all political, it's all policy based. So, it's a dramatic tweet or whatever, this is our hemisphere, he will not allow our security to be threatened. I don't find that to be a particularly controversial thing to say. I don't think Joe Biden would have said, hey, come on into the Western Hemisphere and threaten our security. John F. Kennedy, had the Bay of Pigs. We had the Spanish-American War. We've always been meddling in other countries in this, other countries in the Western Hemisphere. So it's not all that surprising to me. I think that, I'm not even sure ultimately what the Donroe Doctrine is. It's like many things. He's trying to intimidate.
That's a really interesting point. And I've heard at least one commentator make the argument that there's really no change. That is basically, we've been intervening for 150 years or more in countries throughout this hemisphere, and we've stood up governments, we've torn governments down, various administrations, Democratic, Republican, doesn't matter. This millennium, last millennium. So there's really no real change. Others would say, well, the gloves are off. This is, he's more crude about it. He doesn't even observe the international niceties to a degree. He doesn't even try to hide it, pretend it didn't happen. Go through the CIA.
I don't know. I mean, we deposed Manuel Noriega in 1989. And I was in Panama at the end of 2024, and they're still smarting about that. They're still upset about it. And so I agree with that commentator you read. I mean, based on what I've read, I'm not really sure what's all that different, except that Trump is trying to put his brand on it now.
Yeah, and here we go. Just real quick. There's your Western Hemisphere. And you can see in blue, there's Venezuela Took me a little. I had to go back and forth between Venezuela and Colombia to get it right. No, I knew that Colombia is both oceans, whereas Colombia is not, or just the opposite. Colombia is both oceans. Venezuela is not. And you can see Greenland. I put it in green because that apparently is Trump's next target. That seems a break, right? We haven't really saber rattled over Greenland in the past.
That is correct. Although apparently, Americans have had their eye on Greenland's resources for many decades. And we have a lot of military bases there. We have a strong military presence. We do have some businesses there. But, of course, again, the way Trump is doing it is, it's very crude. It's very aggressive. I would not hazard a guess as to what he's going to do on this, because he, I'll say this, he's unpredictable. I think it's unlikely that he's going to send troops there. I don't know if Trump really wants to destroy NATO or even conceivably provoke a war with Europe.
Would that happen? I want your thoughts on that, because apparently the UK and France have said they will not allow the US to attack Denmark, a NATO ally.
I am not going to hazard a guess. I don't know. I hope we don't get to that point.
Yeah, me too. But I just can't see that happening. But I can see Trump sending an expeditionary force up to Greenland. That I could actually see happening. I don't think the United Kingdom is going to risk a full-scale war with the United States. I just don't see that. But maybe Trump would back down. We'll find out, I guess.
Well, one thing about Trump is he does say a lot of things.
He does. But you got a guy like Stephen Miller, with his ear. To me, that is a very frightening development as well. I see you nodding, so.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm flattered that my point was actually taken as, and I'm serious. I'm not being funny. I mean, because you're, if you say, yeah, that makes some sense. That I appreciate that.
Stephen Miller is a concerning individual.
We are in somewhat uncharted waters. Well, you see the Western Hemisphere there, although it seems to include. I don't know how that works, because I guess part of Africa and UK are technically in the. Yeah, if the prime meridian is the divide along with the 180 degrees, that's why. But most people would say it's Greenland, North America, South America, part of Antarctica. One country you don't see there, Steve, is Syria. And we just launched attacks on Syria, a country where we also helped Israel depose the leader. How does the Donroe Doctrine fit into intervening in the Middle East at all opportunities?
I think that the true Donroe Doctrine is Trump does whatever he wants, wherever he wants.
Is that politically a winner? And to put it a different way, could and should Democrats use that as a cudgel against Trump and the Republicans coming up in the next cycle? Or do you think a lot of Americans like that? They like this kind of projection of power. There's a certain vicarious thrill knowing we've got the biggest, baddest bully on the block.
Well, there's certainly an appeal for many people with the idea that, like you say, we're the biggest guy on the block, and if American troops aren't at risk, then people aren't concerned. But I think for the Democrats to do well in future elections, they should do what has worked for politicians ever since elections first came out, which is telling people how they're going to make their lives better than the guy in office. So that's the winner for the Democrats in 2026. And I think they've got a lot of material to work with.
I agree with you 100% on that, Steve. I think that's the focus. You got to talk to people about how you're going to address the challenges that they face, how you're going to make life better for them. I think that was a manifest failure of the Kamala Harris campaign, and that's why she lost. And before we go, actually, if you can stick with me just a little longer, I kept you long last time. Do you have to run? Do you have a hard break?
I'm sorry?
Do you have a hard break, or you can give me another 10 minutes or so? Because I want to get into it's one right now.
I give you 5 more minutes.
All right, real quick. I want to just play this clip then. I won't play the clip. What I want to do is, I don't know how much you've been following Zohran Mamdani, the new mayor in the city of New York, but he's been getting it from the right, nonstop since he became a viable candidate for the Democratic nomination. He recently appointed a woman named Sia, I believe, Weaver, to be what's being called the housing czar. I'm not sure the exact title. She has kind of an interesting history on social media, attacking legitimately. I mean, she has attacked. I don't think her tweets are being misrepresented, but I'm going to put the tweets right on screen. And a couple of questions about this. So here's Sia Weaver in 2019. She deleted all these, but people went back and found them. Private property, including and kind of especially home ownership, is a weapon of white supremacy masquerading as wealth building public policy. And she's getting criticized for that. I got another tweet. I want to get a couple of them up here. Here we go. Gentrification narratives, which I'm not clear what a gentrification narrative is exactly, are pretty tired and not helpful anymore. Gentrification is caused by rent-seeking developers. It's part of a centuries-long process of white supremacy in the housing land market, which, by the way, I did not make those highlights. She's, hearing now. I have issues with these statements, but do you think, I'll phrase it this way, do you think they should have, that based on them, Mamdani, A, shouldn't have appointed her, or B, when they came to his attention, should have withdrawn her or asked for her resignation?
I had not heard this before you brought it up on the screen. I'm not sure what she was appointed to. I don't know what his range of options are. But
you are such a lawyer. Look at you. I've got to know this. You got to give me these details. I can't really answer.
No, I'll answer. Don't worry.
It's fair. It's fair. That's fair.
Mamdani's brand is busting things up. And so he wants to do things differently. And he's a very charismatic person. And so in his world, someone who says something like this, whether you agree with it or not, however provocative you find it, in his world, that's a good thing. That's the kind of person he wants. So how he's able to govern, I don't know. We'll see. He hasn't been in office very long. So I won't even say the jury's out. Nothing's been done yet. But, much the same way, Trump appoints people who say all sorts of outrageous things on the other side of the political spectrum. And he stands by them and they get the job and things happen. I mean, ultimately, the real question is going to be where the rubber meets the road is whether she's able to competently do whatever job he's appointed her to, Mamdani has appointed her to. And so, like you go back to Pete Hegseth, who on paper was not qualified to be Secretary of Defense. But if he ran a tight, well-organized ship, people wouldn't care about what his qualifications are on paper. Unfortunately, your paper qualifications are not always, but often a pretty good indication of how well you're going to do the job you're appointed to. And so if this woman's issue is that she sends inflammatory tweets and she doesn't like white people, as it would seem to be from what she said, but she's able to do her job well, then, that's just kind of, she's a quirky individual or not. She has these political views. But if she does a lousy job on it, because she is so focused on race and not focused on the substance of what she's trying to do, we'll find out soon enough. And I suspect at that point, Mamdani is going to show her the door. The
office to which she was appointed is Director of the Mayor's Office to Protect Tenants. And the pushback from the Justice Department has been that she has to protect all tenants regardless of race. What we've seen from the Trump administration, I believe, is a real concern about white people allegedly being discriminated against, but not people of color, even though the latter is far more likely, although I won't say that it never happens the other way around, but it does seem clear that the president doesn't seem to care much about whether black people or people of color or other colors are discriminated against. There's Sia Weaver. See, now what my thought on this is, now I don't agree that land ownership is itself a tool of white supremacy. I think when you have a country where you have massive wealth and income inequality and black people are among the groups at the bottom of that hierarchy, then yes, land ownership can often be, work against them. But it's also in the past worked in favor of black people. And certainly blacks who own homes are very house proud and love their homes just as much as whites, and they don't want them taken away any more than anyone else. It seems clear that home ownership is a tool that should be used along with rentals to address how we house everyone. You see Sia Weaver there. I thought, and I just want to make this final point, Steve, and then I'll let you. What you said was so spot on. It's interesting. Mamdani, I thought, handled this perfectly. And I have to give him a lot of credit. I do think those were problematic. I think what you see on the left is often to get a leg up when you're fighting to, kind of climb the political ladder as a leftist, is you make inflammatory statements, just as you have to on the right. You say things that are going to provoke people. And when you take a class-based approach to history, as I do, that doesn't often appeal to people. They want to know that their group, their identity group is the group that's targeted. And they don't want to hear, well, poor people need help. Working people need help. They want to hear, no. Black people need help. As Jews, we know Jews like to play the victim card all the time, even though often we're not victims. So all of that is an issue, and it helps you climb the tree if you're on the left or right.
The thing is that everybody on whatever side of the political spectrum engages in identity politics because they are appealing to specific groups, whether the groups are black people, Jewish people, like you say, poor people, rich people, country club set, whatever. You got your identifiable group that you're trying to, from whom you're trying to get their votes. It's just a question of which group you're going for. So, she is representing tenants. There are a lot of black landlords out there. There are a lot of white landlords. Having property generally helps you advance in society. Having a good job helps you advance in society, too. Being married, as a general matter, helps you advance in society. There are all sorts of things that do, but it doesn't mean that people who don't have those things should not be permitted to advance or anything like that. But I do think there's value in at least acknowledging the benefits those things cause, and then ask, all right, what are we going to do, if anything? Sometimes you don't do anything.
Well, I think the response, and I agree with that, was spot on by, Mamdani said he didn't respond directly to what Weaver said. She said they were regretful, and not something I would say today. I don't think that's sufficient. I'm going to respond to that in a moment. But she does also say, which I totally agree with, I want to make sure that everyone has a safe and affordable place to live, whether they rent or own. And that's what I'm laser focused on. Now, Steve, if she does that, nobody will care. That's your point, right?
That's what I said. If she does her job, nobody will care. Sure, she is regretful. She wishes they hadn't come forward, but she's not saying I shouldn't have said it. But even if she did, whatever. Do your job and people will be happy.
I wish what she had said is, my race-based critical race theory analysis really doesn't fully account for the wealth and income inequality, the divides we see in America today. It's much more based on simply classic exploitation by wealthy people who have done that throughout history to everyone they could do it to. And that's what we see here too. And what we need to do is unite black, white, Latino, everyone against those exploiters, regardless of their color. That's what I want to hear, but I'll never get that. So unless I listen to my show, then I'll hear it. Otherwise, I don't get to hear it.
That's a great way to wrap up.
All right, Steve, anything, final word? Guests always get the final word.
Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
It's great having Steve on. What an honor for me, really. And I'm so glad, I'm going to throw this at you, Steve. I'm so glad that, now that you're retired, you can come on and spill the tea, because if you were still at Justice, he'd be closed up like an oyster and there'd be nothing. You'd get nothing. No comment. I can't even say no comment. There's
something to be said for that, Hal. I'll say that.
All right, that'll do it for today's Halitics. I'll be back tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Thanks for being part of our show.